You're standing on a blood-soaked plain where the air still smells of iron and smoke. Around you, the silence is worse than the screaming was. Thousands of bodies sprawl across trampled earth, and in the distance, flames consume what used to be a fortified camp. The war is over. The battle ended hours ago. What's happening now, this isn't combat anymore. This is something the ancient world will whisper about for generations, something that makes even the victors avoid each other's eyes. Before we dive deeper, drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. It honestly amazes me that a story from 479 BC can reach someone on their phone in São Paulo, Mumbai, or Toronto right now. History isn't just the past. It's ours. August 479 BC, 11 months after Thermopylae. The Greek world has spent nearly a year holding its breath, watching Persian forces sweep through their lands like a plague. King Leonidas is dead, his body desecrated on Xerxes' orders, beheaded, crucified, left to rot as a lesson. Athens has been burned twice. Not occupied, burned. Every temple reduced to ash, every home collapsed into rubble. The Persians didn't just conquer, they erased. But near a small town called Plataea, in the flat plains of Boeotia, something is about to shift. The largest Greek army ever assembled, over 100,000 men, faces down what remains of the Persian invasion force. At the front of the Greek lines stand 10,000 Spartans. Not 300 this time, 10,000. Every able-bodied Spartan citizen, plus thousands more from their territories. They haven't come to hold a pass. They've come to finish what Thermopylae started. What happens next will answer a question that plagues every civilization. What does vengeance actually look like when an entire people decide mercy is no longer an option? The weeks leading to this moment were a slow-burning fuse. Mardonius, Xerxes' most trusted general, had been left behind with over 100,000 troops to finish conquering Greece. He tried diplomacy, first offered Athens everything, complete reconstruction of their city, Persian gold to rebuild every temple, territorial expansion, autonomy. All they had to do was abandon the Greek alliance. The Athenian assembly, living in refugee camps on Salamis, staring across the water at their ruined home, refused. One council member who suggested accepting the offer was stoned to death by the crowd. His wife and children were dragged from their shelter and killed by Athenian women. The message was clear. There would be no negotiation. Some wounds don't heal. They metastasize. So Mardonius burned Athens again, systematically, methodically. What the first destruction missed, the second annihilated. Then he withdrew to Plataea and waited on ground that favored Persian cavalry, daring the Greeks to come fight on his terms. And they came. Pausanias, the young Spartan regent untested, carrying the weight of his uncle Leonidas's death, led them north. City after city joined the march. Corinth, Megara, Tegea. When the combined Greek force finally reached the hills overlooking the Persian camp, it was the largest army Greece had ever fielded. The Persians controlled the flat plains below, their cavalry ready to wheel and strike. The Greeks held the high ground, their hoplite phalanx unbreakable in frontal assault, but vulnerable if caught in the open. For days, neither side could attack without sacrificing their advantage. So they waited, staring at each other across the valley, the tension winding tighter. Then the killing started in small ways. A skirmish in the foothills. Persian cavalry probing Greek positions got too close. Athenian hoplites engaged them, and in the chaos an arrow struck the horse of Mecisteus, commander of the Persian cavalry. The animal collapsed. Mecisteus, draped in golden armor, tried to fight on foot. The Athenians swarmed him. They pulled him into their formation, stabbed him through every gap in his armor until he stopped moving, then stripped the gold from his corpse piece by piece. They paraded his body through the Greek lines on a cart. Every soldier filed past to see it. On the Persian side, the wailing echoed across the plain for hours. Heads shaved in mourning, horses' manes cut. This wasn't just a commander. Mecisteus was Mardonius's friend. The psychological balance shifted. Blood had been drawn, and it tasted like victory. But Mardonius wasn't finished. Days later, under cover of darkness, Persian cavalry found the Gargophian spring, the Greeks' only water source. They systematically destroyed it, filled it with dirt, rubble, animal carcasses, poisoned what remained. By dawn, 110,000 Greek soldiers were staring at dehydration and death within days. Pausanias ordered a night-time withdrawal to new positions with water access. It should have been a controlled maneuver. Instead, it became chaos. Nighttime retreats are nearly impossible, even for trained armies. Units lost formation. Commanders lost contact with their men. Some groups retreated too far, others stopped in the wrong positions. By dawn, the Greek army was scattered across miles of open ground, the unified battle line shattered. From his camp, Mardonius saw Greeks in retreat, formation broken, scattered. He saw opportunity. He ordered the full Persian army to advance. This is where history pivots on a single decision. Pausanias, commanding the Spartan right wing, halted his forces and turned to face the approaching Persians. His 10,000 Spartans and Tegeans locked shields, dressed their lines 8 ranks deep, and waited. But there was a problem. Greek religious law required favorable omens before battle animal sacrifices read by priests. The omens came back unfavorable. Pausanias ordered new sacrifices. Again, unfavorable. Meanwhile, Persian archers closed to range and began loosing volleys. Arrows rained down on the Spartan formation. Men fell, struck through gaps in armor, through exposed flesh. Spartans died standing in place, forbidden by their religious law to advance, unable to retreat without breaking formation. Pausanias kept ordering sacrifices. The omens stayed unfavorable. More men fell. Then whether the gods finally answered or Pausanias simply decided divine approval could wait, the order came. Advance. The Spartan phalanx didn't run. It marched. A walking bronze wall, shields locked, spears protruding in rows. The Persians planted their wicker shields in the ground and braced for impact. The collision was catastrophic. Spartan spears 8 feet long, designed for overhead thrusts, punched through wicker, through lighter Persian armor, through flesh. The weight of 8 ranks pushing forward collapsed the Persian front line. But the Persians didn't break immediately. What followed was close-quarters savagery most Greeks had never experienced. Persians grabbed Spartan spears with bare hands, their palms shredding, pulling the weapons aside to create openings. They fought with daggers inside spear range, clawing for any advantage. For minutes that felt like hours, the outcome hung uncertain. Mardonius fought at the front, mounted on a white horse, surrounded by 1,000 elite guards, the best warriors Persia had. The fighting around him was concentrated, vicious. His guards died one by one, but they made the Spartans pay for every inch. Then Mardonius fell. Sources disagree on how a thrown stone, a spear thrust, simply overwhelmed when his horse was killed. What's certain is this: the Persian commander, Xerxes' chosen general, architect of the invasion, died in the melee. The effect was immediate. Word spread through Persian ranks. Mardonius is dead. The center began to waver, then broke. Once a phalanx breaks an enemy line, what follows isn't battle. It's slaughter. The Persians ran, some toward the fortified camp. Others scattered across the plains, seeking any escape. Greek light infantry helots, peltasts, cavalry surged forward. These troops, held back during the initial clash, were fast. They could run down fleeing men, catch them in the open, separated from formations. The plains of Plataea became a killing field. Not metaphorically, literally. For miles, Greek forces pursued and cut down Persians who had thrown down their weapons, who were stumbling in exhaustion, who were begging in languages the Greeks didn't understand or care to. Thousands reached the fortified camp and barricaded themselves behind wooden walls. Inside were supplies, treasure, and non-combatants' servants, camp followers, families of officers. The camp was defensible. If they could hold it, they might regroup, buy time for reinforcements. The Greeks surrounded it. At first, the Persians held the walls. Spartan forces attempted to breach the gates and were repulsed. Spartans, trained for open-field combat, struggled with siege warfare. Then the Athenians arrived. More experienced with varied warfare, they found a weak point in the fortifications, coordinated a concentrated assault, and brought down a section of wooden wall. Greek forces poured through. Here's where the historical record gets quiet in a way that speaks louder than any details could. Multiple sources, Herodotus, Plutarch, others writing decades later, all agree on the outcome, but they describe what happened inside the camp with a curious restraint, as if the facts alone are indictment enough. The Greeks didn't take prisoners. Every Persian soldier found inside was killed. Organized resistance collapsed almost immediately. The Greeks moved through the camp systematically, through tents, supply areas, every section. Where resistance occurred, it was brief. The non-combatants fared no better. Servants, camp followers, families, ancient warfare had conventions about such things. Armies often spared civilians, took them as slaves, used them for ransom. This wasn't that. Herodotus, writing a generation later, states it plainly. Of the Persian army at Plataea, numbering over 100,000, approximately 3,000 survived. 3,000. The rest, nearly 100,000 men, were dead by nightfall. Even if you assume ancient sources exaggerated troop numbers, even if the Persian force was 60,000 or 80,000, the casualty rate exceeds 95%. In ancient warfare, armies typically broke and fled when casualties hit 20 to 30%. 50% was catastrophic army ending. 95% requires explanation beyond the Greeks won. This wasn't a battle that spiraled out of control. This was a decision made at command level to push every stage the pursuit, the siege, the breach to maximum lethality. Pausanias, the Athenian generals, the allied commanders shaped how the victory would be prosecuted, and they chose total elimination. After the killing stopped, the Greeks took inventory. The treasure was immense gold bullion, Persian nobles' personal wealth, plundered goods from Athens and other sacked cities, jewelry, precious textiles. Pausanias ordered everything catalogued. 10% set aside for the gods. The rest divided among Greek cities according to their contribution. The Helots, the enslaved people who fought in the Greek army, received nothing. Pausanias preserved Mardonius's personal tent intact. He ordered a meal prepared using the Persian general's kitchen staff, his supplies, his gold dishware. Then he ordered a typical Spartan meal prepared alongside it. He invited Greek commanders to view both meals side by side, Persian luxury next to Spartan simplicity. The message was carefully crafted. Look what they brought to conquer us with. Look what we defeated them with. But there was a darker subtext no one spoke aloud. Look what we did to take this. News of the victory spread across Greece. Legend claims that on the same day the Greek navy won a decisive victory at Mycale, destroying the Persian fleet. Whether the timing is accurate or mythologized, the strategic result was clear. The Persian invasion was over. Greece had survived. But survival doesn't capture what happened. The psychological landscape had shifted. When Greek poets wrote victory odes, when temples were built and monuments erected, certain details were omitted. The tactical brilliance was analyzed. The speed of victory praised. What happened inside the fortified camp after the walls fell was mentioned in passing, if at all. Herodotus doesn't moralize. He reports, many died, the camp was taken, the wealth divided. Plutarch, writing centuries later, is slightly more direct. He mentions that some Greeks questioned whether what happened after the battle was necessary, whether the scale of killing served any military purpose. The Persian survivors who made it back across the Hellespont carried a message to the empire. The Greeks are no longer just defending. When they win, they erase. In pure military terms, Plataea achieved its objective completely. The threat was eliminated. But there's a question that echoes through the historical record, one that even ancient sources seem uncomfortable answering directly. Why so few survivors? Ancient battles, even decisive ones, typically saw the majority of defeated armies survive the actual combat. At Plataea, the casualty rate was genocidal. This suggests something beyond heat of battle chaos. The Greeks were capable of restraint. When they later besieged Thebes for siding with Persia, they spared the city and only executed the leaders. That restraint was available at Plataea too. They chose not to use it. Within a generation, Athens would transform its defensive alliance into an empire, besieging and enslaving cities that tried to leave. Sparta, watching Athens's expansion, would grow fearful. The rivalry would explode into the Peloponnesian War, a 30-year conflict that devastated Greece. Both sides would employ tactics learned from the Persian Wars. That victory isn't just about winning, it's about what you're willing to do with that victory. When the Greeks erected a victory monument at Plataea, the inscription listed the participating cities, honored the Greek dead, and celebrated the triumph in words meant to inspire pride and unity. Yet there was a silence in that inscription, a deliberate omission. It didn't mention the 100,000 Persians who fell on that plain. It didn't need to. The scale of the destruction was impossible to miss for anyone who had been there or heard the stories afterward. Every Greek city that had sent soldiers to fight knew the magnitude of what their men had done. Every Persian who survived or heard word of the battle understood exactly what happened when the Greek lines held firm and the walls of their forces collapsed. The monument, in this sense, was both celebration and warning. It proclaimed victory, yes, but also served as a quiet testament to the cost of defying the Greeks, especially the Spartans. It was meant to echo across generations. Triumph was achieved. but at a price so devastating that it could be measured in lives extinguished and ambitions ended. There was no need for exaggeration. The truth of Plataea was terrifying enough on its own. Thermopylae has survived in our memory because it is simple to comprehend. A small band of warriors standing against overwhelming odds, noble in their sacrifice, heroic in their resistance, glorious in their defeat. Plataea, however, is more complex, more morally tangled. The Greeks did not merely repel the Persian army, they obliterated it. They struck with such finality that Persia never again launched a major invasion of mainland Greece. The massacre was total, a response so absolute that it reshaped the strategic landscape for decades. It was not revenge in the neat, cinematic sense. It was a calculated, systematic destruction that left no room for reprisal. By the time the dust settled, anyone who heard the story friend or foe understood. The price of killing Spartans, of challenging the Greeks' homeland, was annihilation. And yet vengeance in the ancient world was rarely tidy. It was raw, brutal, and morally ambiguous. The victory at Plataea was decisive, but it was not without its shadows. The Greeks had demonstrated extraordinary courage and coordination, but they had also faced the limits of morality and war. When does the act of defending one's homeland cross the line into elimination? When does necessary force become deliberate slaughter? When does the triumph of victory transform into something that haunts even the victors themselves? These were questions that lingered in the minds of men who had survived the carnage, questions that no victory monument could answer. The battlefield of Plataea was left littered with the dead. Mass graves swallowed thousands of bodies, both Greek and Persian, a grim testament to the scale of the conflict. Treasures were claimed, monuments were erected, and official histories were written. Yet beneath the public narrative of triumph, private reflections must have troubled the minds of the soldiers and commanders alike. They had survived. They had avenged fallen comrades. They had secured their cities and their way of life. And yet, in the quiet moments after the clamor had faded, the clashing of swords replaced by silence, the question remained, why did this victory feel so heavy, so incomplete? Why did triumph carry a weight that could not be measured by gold, praise, or monuments? In that moment, in 479 B.C., the Greeks learned something profound about themselves. They realized the depths of human capability when survival alone was no longer the motivating force. They had destroyed an army, ensured the security of their cities, and changed the course of history. And yet, in doing so, they glimpsed a darker reflection, the capacity for destruction that existed within even the most celebrated warriors. Plataea was more than a military success. It was a mirror held up to the Greeks themselves, revealing both their courage and their potential for unspeakable violence. The legacy of Plataea, then, is twofold. It is a story of liberation, of civilization preserved, of an empire turned back at its most ambitious. But it is also a story of human complexity, the uncomfortable truth that in war, even the righteous can cross thresholds that leave marks on the soul. The victory monuments would stand for centuries, the cities would celebrate, the histories would record the glory, but somewhere in the hearts and minds of those who fought, a quiet, unspoken question lingered. We survived. We prevailed. We avenged our dead, and yet, what did we lose along the way? What part of ourselves, once crossed, could never be fully regained? Plataea reminds us that victory is never as simple as it seems. It is measured not just in lives spared or enemies defeated, but in the echoes it leaves in those who lived through it the weight of memory and the moral reckoning that follows even the most triumphant days.